from West Virginia Public Broadcasting. Support for the Legislature Today is provided by
West Virginia University, a land-grant, space grant, R1 research institution. Learn more at wvu.edu.
Good evening, I'm Suzanne Higgins. On the Legislature Today, lawmakers praise the professionals who work with victims of domestic and sexual violence. We'll have that story later in the program, but first an update on both the Senate and House proposed state budgets with Brad McElhinny of West Virginia MetroNews and Stephen Allen Adams of Ogden newspaper. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks.
You know, we were all following the Senate floor session today because Senate Bill 150, their proposed state budget, was on second reading. Apparently, we were expecting amendments today, but it was advanced to third reading with the ability to amend. We're told that that'll be taken up tomorrow, Saturday. They're in session. But we did get a sneak peek of what those amendments are going to look like. Stephen, I'll begin with you. We heard from Senator Craig Blair, Finance Chairman. Tell us what he had to say.
Sure. Well, one of the big amendments that he is pushing forward is restoring funding to the intellectual and developmental disabled waiver program. That was originally cut in the Senate Finance Committee's budget earlier this week. They lowered it from 9.8 and they lowered it by 10 million. This restores that funding
from what the governor proposes. The governor proposed almost 20 million to wipe out that waiting list of 1,000.
That's correct. So this amendment, if adopted tomorrow, would put that funding back to the way the governor recommended it to be.
And you know, I was told by the Senate Minority Leader, Brad, that they had stayed late to put this very amendment together. And so the Republicans kind of stole their thunder by coming out and saying we're going to refund that.
I was expecting an argument today, and if you'll recall, all the way back to yesterday, the governor had said, I'm not signing this budget without this money that I promised.
It was non-negotiable in his words.
Non-negotiable, he said. So, on the timeline of events today, Democrats came out with a press release, a statement saying that they were going to push for this amendment today. And then we began to hear that Republicans were on board with that too. Stephen noticed that there was an amendment in the system with Senator Blair, the finance chairman's name on it, and he was going to put this money in. We on Metro News Talkline had Jeremiah Samples, the deputy director of the Department of Health and Human Resources, who said, yes, we've been talking this morning and we've got it worked out. So, the drama that we were expecting didn't unfold, which is bad for us from a news perspective, but in terms of trying to reach agreement on the budget and getting over this particular conflict, it's a good thing.
And it should be noted that the funding that they used to go ahead and put that and fund that back to 9.8 million comes from a $14 million padding sort of surplus that they included in the Senate Finance version of the budget. So now that padding is just $4 million.
Yeah, there is not much room, and we've already got a peek at another amendment, Stephen, that Senator Stallings is suggesting that we prepare for the coronavirus.
Yes, Senator Ron Stallings, Democrat from Boone County, has proposed taking $2 million from the operating expenses line item of the state Supreme Court and taking that and putting it in the governor's contingency fund to create basically a fund to prepare for coronavirus, which of course is making headlines and a lot of people are concerned about it, and a number of delegates and senators have raised concerns that the governor's budget and the budget as presented by both committees really hasn't included any additional funding to prepare for that just in case. So this $2 million, if it's adopted tomorrow, will at least put some more money in that line item so we can prepare, so DHHR can come up with plans and better prepare the public for what might happen and what some say probably will happen with coronavirus coming to West Virginia.
You know, Brad, we heard Senator Stallings say maybe this is something that we dip into the rainy day fund. Can you talk about, you know, some of these other funds that you know, are available when we are putting the state budget together? We have the rainy day fund, but more often than not, there's that excess lottery fund. And this is the time in the session when we start hearing these amendments that are calling upon designation of these excess lottery funds.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll hear them talk about sweeping accounts if budget times are tight, unspent money in the agencies. But you know, what Senator Stallings is talking about preparing to do is deal with potentially a public health emergency. And if you'll remember the beginning of the session, one of the topics of conversation was the governor said that there's $300 million in Medicaid reserves, and he wanted to plug a budget gap with 100 million or so of that and leave another 150 million into a rainy day account specifically for Medicaid money. You know, if this coronavirus possibility becomes as challenging, as straining as people are saying it might, well, that money might come in handy. But in the meantime, you know, if Senator Stallings is looking for $2 million, well, we've got 150 million in reserve.
Yeah, and we've heard in both the House and Finance committees the you know several amendments to try to fund particular things that didn't get through in this budget. Sexual and domestic violence, the Beckley Home for Veterans that they've been trying to get. We're hearing multiple. The MARC train. There was a lot of discussion in that. What else are we hearing in those committees where things are still in flux?
Well, one of the big bills, of course, we're waiting on right now is House Bill 4092, the foster care bill that includes about 16.8 million to fund the reimbursement rates for providers and for foster families and for kinship families. Now, this is in the House version of the budget. It has not been taken up in committee yet. It's been double committee reference to Judiciary and then to Finance on the Senate side. That's obviously a bill that has a big price tag to it. Right now, of course, one committee, the House Judiciary Committee, is looking at the Senate's intermediate appellate courts bill, which of course also has a price tag anywhere from 6.3 million for its first full year operation up to 7.2 million if they were to include criminal appeals in that as well. That's another big price tag item, and based on whatever amendments come out of that committee today, that price tag could also go up. So there's still a lot of moving parts before we get to the end of the session next week.
Sometimes what they will do within these finance committees also is designate things to be on the surplus list, which means basically if we get to the end of the fiscal year and there is any money left over, then you go down the list. So that list right now includes some of Governor Justice's priorities, I believe, what we used to call Jim's Dream, which is now called Jobs and Hope. It's sort of an intersection of workforce training and drug addiction rehabilitation. So millions of dollars potentially being cut from Jobs and Hope, but that is in surplus. A few $1 million to tourism that is on that surplus list.
Now, which bill or which chamber's proposal are you talking about? We've got the House and then the Senate. Now, I believe the Senate carved some funding from both the Community and Schools program.
Yeah.
That's another pet project
Governor
of
Justice.
the First Ladies, and that's kind of an intervention program. They're putting professionals in schools to help kids with with trauma and to deal with that, to keep them in school. And then the Jobs and Hope takes a cut in the Senate budget.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because also in Senator Blair's amendment that will be considered tomorrow, that line item for communities and schools was reduced to, I believe, $400,000. down from, I think, just over $4 million in the governor's proposal.
It's a significant cut.
But that is coming back up, I believe, to $3.4 million, which is still less than what the governor recommended, but only slightly. So if that amendment passes tomorrow, that will actually restore a good deal of that funding.
Anything else that is significant about what we see in the two proposals right now?
Well, I will tell you, at least based on my numbers, when you compare the governor's budget as presented at the beginning of the session to the Senate budget cuts about $27 million off the governor's budget. But when you look at the House budget, it actually increases by $21 million above what the Senate has tried to do. So I find it kind of interesting that there are such differences between the House and Senate budgets. They've got plenty of time to work out their differences. And again, so many moving parts still waiting to be passed that could affect what the budget looks like going forward. But I thought that was interesting that there's just such kind of a stark difference between the Eric Householder, the chairman of House Finance, versus Senator Blair, the chairman of Senate Finance. You
mentioned the big ticket item of the foster care reform bill. Over on the Senate side, they were successful in getting out what they said is a major public health bill, and that's a dental bill to expand to adult Medicaid recipients, restorative kind of dental benefits. And that's a big ticket item. It's a Senate bill. It needs to go over. And so you just wonder if something like that will make it through the system.
Yeah, I mean, anything with money right now, people have been saying all along, it's a flat budget, it's tight. There are differences of opinion on priorities between the House and the Senate, and we've only got a week left to resolve these things. And I think an increasing sense that that state revenue is going to be wobbly at best over the coming year or two, so difficult decisions to be made.
And you mentioned the intermediate courts that now they were amending that in committee today. I believe you were listening to it just a little bit ago.
Yeah, they were amending that. Senator Romano just walked by and that got his attention. Yeah, I mean, so even Senate Judiciary Chairman Charles Trump testified before the House Judiciary Committee this morning and acknowledged that bill has been before the Senate and has passed through the Senate 4 or 5 years in a row now. And he said he truly believes in it, which is why he continues to do it. But the obstacle has been the House and the first step.
That's kind of unusual, isn't it? I mean, he was at the public hearing, or did you say Senator Trump? Yeah,
and people kept conceding their time to him, saying, you can have my time to speak. But he testified this morning. You rarely see, at least I do, a lawmaker from the opposite chamber coming over to testify, although I wouldn't be surprised if you see Speaker Hanshaw do it on his investment fund, because he's the only one who really understands the nuts and bolts of it. But Senator Trump has continued to be out front in his support of this and is certainly straddling that line between a senator and someone who is essentially lobbying for that bill.
And also with this particular bill too, when you look at some of the issues that have come up in the Senate that have been kind of key issues of the Senate, the Greyhound Breeders Fund bill, it failed. The tax reform proposals, the House bill, the Senate bill passed, but the resolution that went along with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna just pause right there because I do want to take a look back at that. We try to do that on Friday. That was a major piece of legislation or initiative on the Senate Republicans' part. We have a little bit of that debate. Just Stephen, just briefly set us up once again. What was the proposal for? And then we'll hear arguments for and against before the vote.
Sure. Well, just quickly, the Senate bill was specifically dealing with removing tangible personal income tax, both manufacturing, inventory, motor vehicles, and it also included tax increases for sales and tobacco taxes to make up for that. It was going to cost $300 million, but with the tax increases included in that, it was that would have taken care of $200 million of it, but would have left $100 million either for possible budget cuts later or savings that would have came in for.
And Republicans largely were saying that this is needed. We were an outlier. That we were what? We were the only state, or one of very few that had this kind of tax. And Democrats were saying, but the taxes that you're putting to fill that would be on individuals. Let's listen to the back and forth persuasive arguments both ways. We'll first listen to Senator Mike Romano, Democrat from Harrison County, Senator Richard Lindsay, Democrat of Kanawha County, Senator Craig Blair, Republican of Jefferson County, and Senator Charles Trump, Republican of Morgan County.
We want to get rid of the business personal property tax. We all know the motor vehicle tax was thrown in as a way to force us to vote for it, but you know the bad thing about Democrats is you can't make us vote for bad policy. We don't like that. We just refuse. And maybe sometimes to our own detriment. The easy thing to do would have been to vote yes and tell everybody we lowered the motor vehicle taxes. But that's a facade. That's not what we're doing. We're playing magic. Up here's the tax cut, behind our back is the tax increase.
To sell the resolution on the idea of saying it's the people's money, let them decide, we make that decision every day in this body on a whole number of issues, on a whole host of issues. And I submit to you that it's difficult for the public to make an informed decision when we can't even agree on what type of tax benefit, if there is one, that the people would gain.
If we're willing to put something out there on the ballot that is so bad and so ill thought out, are we not putting ourselves at risk? Mr. President, I have no fear of that. I'm on the ballot. I have no fear. I trust the people in West Virginia to make the right decisions when they're given the right information, and that will be denied to them here in just a few minutes.
Let's adopt this resolution and send it to the House of Delegates. And let's give the people of West Virginia the right to decide for themselves whether they want to give the legislature the power to lower or eliminate the tax on their vehicles, to lower or eliminate the tax on any tangible personal property, machinery, equipment, inventory. Let's let them decide the question.
I need to make a correction. I misspoke. I said Senator Craig Blair was from Jefferson. He's actually from Berkeley County, so I wanted to correct that. Brad, before this vote, which of course went down, the Senate leadership, the Republicans, gathered beforehand, and several of them spoke. What was your sense? Did they really believe they were going to get that 2/3 majority that they needed for this?
I think they had their doubts, and that's why they had that gathering at the back of the chamber. It was mostly for media, but intended to show their support. And the pitch they made was, look, we have already passed an accompanying bill that would essentially put the tax issues into code, but please let the people of West Virginia, was their pitch, decide on a constitutional amendment dealing with these property taxes. So they made that one last pitch, and to me it was kind of a rarity because they were trying to push it over the goal line. As it turned out, they were nowhere near. They were 5 votes short, including 2 members of their own caucus.
And it seemed kind of odd too. I heard this from a number of people the day before, when they passed, Senate Bill 837, which had the tax cuts and tax breaks in it. There was a lot of confusion as to why they voted for that first versus voting for Senate Joint Resolution 9, the constitutional amendment that would have actually put language in the Constitution to allow them to do what they wanted to do in Senate Bill 837. Why didn't they vote for the SJR first, which would have failed, but then they wouldn't have had to vote on SB 837 and put themselves on the record, particularly going into an election year for various tax increases.
All right, something else that we've been following this week, and that is the what's been known as the Harpers Ferry Tourism Bill. You both have reported on that. Brad, why don't you start out and tell us what that is and what was the opposition to it? It did pass.
Oh man, do we have another half hour?
Yeah.
All right, so
actually 3 minutes.
the town of Harpers Ferry has been debating more than a decade about the way the restoration of a historic hotel should take shape. And this is the Hilltop House Hotel, which dates back to the 1800s. Unfortunately, is now closed and deteriorating, but a couple and some other investors have bought the property, have plans to
make a huge investment.
Rebuild it. It's more than $100 million investment, but it has been bogged down in details. For example, should the roads outside the hotel, which are roads belonging to the city, be turned over to the hotel developers so that they can change the shape of them and can contour them in a way that they see fit to accept deliveries and cater to their guests. So all these details have not been agreed to over the years. Finally, both the developers and most of the delegation representing the Eastern Panhandle has run out of patience, and their solution has been to, in some cases, very large investment projects, $25 million and above, but in instances of very small towns, 2,000 people or below, in some instances, the development office could take over overseeing these development projects. It was a partisan vote in the Senate. Essentially, Republicans said, yeah, let the state intervene, and Democrats said that's overreach, which is a little bit of a philosophy flip-flop. The House of Delegates was a dominant vote, bipartisan, saying, yeah, let's do it. So that vote was finalized in the Senate this week and now goes on to the governor, whose development office and tourism office, I think, are in favor of it. But it might not be the end, because the town of Harpers Ferry is also considering legal action.
Well, just real quickly, you're looking at an issue of local control versus, frankly, some craziness in the town. You're talking about an election that's still waiting to be decided. I believe that's going before the state Supreme Court. We have a situation where the mayor's daughter was charged with illegally voting because she also is registered.
In a very close election.
Yeah, in a very close election. I think Republicans are all about local control. When they see this and all the craziness that has gone on for almost a decade in Harpers Ferry, I think you have to weigh the pros and cons.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Brad McElhinny
Thank
of
you.
West Virginia MetroNews and Stephen Allen Adams of Ogden Newspapers. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also in the Senate today, lawmakers passed Senate Resolution 59, declaring it Domestic and Sexual Violence Awareness Day at the Capitol. Several stood to praise members of the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. We'll hear first from Senator Ryan Weld of Brooke County, Senator Roland Roberts of Raleigh County, and Senator William Ehlenfeld of Ohio County.
What these people do, I think, is kind of unsung and unnoticed a lot of times, because they're working behind the scenes. While the prosecutor might be the one in the courtroom, they're the ones that take the time and meet with the victims outside of the courtroom, before the trial, while it's pending. And so I think it's very important to recognize the work that they do.
But one of the things that this body and our state needs to address is to put in those preventive measures so that we could help our people, our population, not have to go through the experiences that would lead them to these people. And that is not being done nearly as much as it should be done.
These folks work under the radar, they work discreetly, they work confidentially. People don't realize how important they are. They work hand in hand with prosecutors and police officers throughout the state. If you talk to a prosecutor, deputy sheriff, police officer, they will tell you that they could not do their jobs effectively without the work of the people that we're about to recognize.
Randy Yohe spent the morning talking to members and guests of the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, who gathered here at the Capitol today.
6 years into an escalating relationship of across-the-board physical, verbal, mental, financial abuse, Megumi Swan-Lehman says without just happening upon a victim's advocacy program, she might not be alive today.
I believe without programs like this, and if I wouldn't have left, it was escalating, getting, worse and worse. And so I think, there would have been some fatalities.
The West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, the West Virginia Foundation for Rape Information and Services, and the West Virginia Child Advocacy Network, all statewide service and treatment coordinators, who all agree that the challenges are overwhelming and the solutions must be multifaceted.
Shelter, emergency shelter, comprehensive case management, crisis advocacy, safety planning, court advocacy, basically any need that they have that's caused by their victimization.
Last year, in the last fiscal year, West Virginia Child Advocacy Centers across the state saw new cases of 4,554 children. And the majority of these cases, more than 50%, were due to allegations of child sexual abuse.
These women say child advocacy and rape crisis centers do not extend to about a quarter of West Virginia counties. They say inadequate funding leaves tens of thousands of victims without vital, close-to-home help.
We spend over $36 million incarcerating sex offenders every year in West Virginia, but only $125,000 on the victims.
Domestic violence relationships are a ticking time bomb, and it's hard to leave. It's very complex. And so having programs like this to help you is amazing, and that was what was awesome for me. I am very thankful for programs.
Programs that this new mother with a new loving partner says are lifesavers. I'm Randy Yohe for the Legislature Today.
Monday on the Legislature Today, we'll pick right back up with the budget process and continue to follow the action in both chambers. I'm Suzanne Higgins. For everyone here at West Virginia Public Broadcasting, thanks for joining us this week. Have a great weekend.